Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center special presentation on reopening Kentucky's economy. With me on this program, we have Speaker of the Kentucky House of Representatives, David Osborne. David, Speaker Osborne, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be with you. Appreciate the forum.
All right. We also have Speaker Pro-Tem David Meade. Speaker Pro-Tem Meade, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's good to be with you here today also.
Yeah. Hey, we've been encouraged to facilitate conversations with our leaders across the state, leaders across the political spectrum, to talk about the economic impacts of the shutdown, the shelter-at-home orders, and other parts of the state and other parts of the economy that have been impacted. And I really am grateful for both of you joining us. I'd like to start out with just to recap just some of the high points of what's happened. Back in March, Governor Andy Beshear issued shelter-at-home orders and essentially said, if you don't have to be out, don't go out. He also determined which businesses are essential and which businesses are non-essential, really shutting down a large part of Kentucky's economy. And of course, because of that, we saw a large number of Kentuckians filing for unemployment. It's 900,000 or so have filed for unemployment at some time. Still a question. Many have not received that their first unemployment check yet. Most recently, Governor Beshear unilaterally asked the federal government for an $865 million loan, secured that loan. And I'd like to start out with Speaker Osborne. Was the governor in contact with you, collaborating with you on whether or not that was the right route to take? Very big obligation, $865 million to shore up a fund that needed to be shored up. But how closely did you work with the governor, Speaker Osborne, on that?
Actually, we had actually no conversation with the governor on that particular issue. The very first time that it was brought to my attention was by a TV reporter who asked if we had any thoughts on it. And that was the first we were made aware of it.
Has this ever been done before? I know we're in extraordinary times. The Kentucky Constitution, Kentucky law gives the governor wide latitude in emergency powers, but has this kind of thing been done before, where a governor unilaterally borrows that kind of money from the federal government?
There was a time, I'm sure it's been done in other instances, but I know in 2008 or 2009, I can't remember which, Governor Beshear's father, Steve Beshear, borrowed about $1 billion from the federal government to cover unemployment insurance shortfalls at that point in time as well. It's not unprecedented, and certainly it is a tool. It is that is available to states that find themselves in crisis positions with regards to their unemployment insurance fund. So I don't know that it was something that we shouldn't consider, but it was certainly something that we should have had a broader conversation about.
Sure. So that was one specific question about the unemployment, but throughout this pandemic, how much collaboration have you had with the governor on various executive orders, on various policies? Has he sought your input, Speaker Osborne?
Unfortunately, Richard, it's been almost non-existent. I continue to have multiple conversations with his staff, principally with Rocky Atkins, his chief advisor, but our lines of communication with the governor have been very, very limited.
Okay, I'm wondering if that's the case for the Senate. Are you aware of if he's been reaching out to the Senate at all?
We've had President Stivers and I talk frequently, several times a week usually, and it's my understanding that his experience has been very similar.
Sure. Speaker Pro Tem David Meade is joining us from Lincoln County. Speaker Pro Tem, before the program, we were talking about a business that you are involved with there, a family business. And you can speak to this, the impact of the shelter-at-home orders and those businesses that are deemed essential or non-essential. Was your business deemed an essential business? Your tool and die cast company, is that correct?
Yeah, we do. We do industrial machinery moving and fabrication, those type things. I actually went to college for electrical engineering, and I've been in the industrial field for several years before I went into real estate. And I've kind of gone back into doing that full time. But we were an essential business because we had government contracts with companies that operated with the government and manufactured products for the government. So we were able to stay open, but that is not our primary customer. Most of our primary customers were closed down throughout the process of the regulations that the governor put in place. And with them being closed down, it's really affected us. We've gone from about 11 to 15 full-time employees that we had out in businesses and factories every day. Now we're operating about 4 full-time employees and calling the others in when we need them, because it's caught up with us with having all these businesses shut down. And we're seeing a tremendous economic impact right here.
So with your business, you're seeing a big impact overall in Lincoln County. What is your sense of how other businesses are faring? Have you been talking to the business community, business leaders there?
I think we're all pretty much in the same boat. Everybody has weathered the storm as best they possibly can, but everyone goes back to the same thing that are all saying the same thing, that if we go through another shutdown, many of us won't survive.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, should have mentioned it earlier. I don't want to have this conversation pitting public health or personal safety against the economy. I think that we all are concerned about health and the lives of our fellow Kentuckians. But after a few months of kind of a blanket approach, a one-size-fits-all approach, we've seen parts of the state impacted that negatively impacted that really aren't affected by COVID-19, like the major metro areas. There are 6 counties in Kentucky that are responsible for 50% or more of the cases. It's Lexington, Louisville, Campbell County, Warren County, which is Bowling Green, and there's another county out there. And we've also seen it's about 60 some counties that have 50 or less cases. Many counties is 54 counties actually, as of yesterday. 54 counties do not have a single fatality due to COVID. And my question is this: if you were in on the discussion, Speaker Osborne, I want to go to you. If you were in on the discussion early on, knowing what we know now, what would your recommendations have been? Could you have maybe fine-tuned the recommendations for each county, perhaps? And let me restate that. Could you see bringing other leaders in, maybe business community leaders, maybe mayors and judge executives, to look at the data in their communities and then to determine what would be best for their community?
I think you have to look at that in 2 parts. I think the initial response has to be looked at a little differently than the responses since then. I think the initial response, everybody was completely uncertain as to what was going on, what was going to transpire. So I think that everybody acknowledged that there were going to be mistakes made, that there would be reactions, there would be overreactions, there would be underreactions in some cases. But as we started to see an opportunity for gradual reopening, I think that was where we needed to get outside the bubble. And to try to look at this thing in a vacuum in its entirety was not really, I didn't think, appropriate. And we tried to have those conversations about bringing in trade groups, bringing in chamber groups to talk about what is appropriate to open certain businesses, to transition from essential versus non-essential to what is safe versus not safe. And I think that those are 2 separate things. Nobody wants to be called non-essential, but everybody wants to be safe. So I think that we needed to be, or we continue to need to be a little more surgical in how we do things. It isn't a one-size-fits-all. What will work in Louisville or in Oldham County may be completely different than the circumstances that the people of Lincoln County are experiencing. So I think to not acknowledge that it does bring incomplete thought to it. And I think that we have to continue to, and you touched on it a little bit ago, that everybody's concerned about public health, and that you don't want to get in a conflict between public health and the other and the economy. But at the same time, you have to consider the overall impacts of this virus and the impacts that it's, because if your metric is simply the virus, then you ignore the financial ruin that many people are finding themselves in, the despair, the anxiety, the depression. You have to look at the abuse, the addiction that is going on, child abuse, spousal abuse. To not consider all of those things as part of the reopening process, I believe is an incomplete picture.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point too. When you look at human beings, we're multifaceted. Our economic life is part of who we are. And of course, if you can't provide for yourself or family, that is going to take a toll on you. Consider some of these specific statistics, dovetailing off what you were just saying. There's been a 25% increase in domestic violence reports in Louisville between February and March. There's been a 20% increase in suicide hotline calls in Louisville by the end of March. And the statewide opioid-related overdoses nearly doubled in the month of May. So these are some of those secondary effects that we've seen because of the closure of so many businesses. Speaker Osborne, would you see now, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if many of these businesses could have determined, business owners could have determined for themselves based on how prevalent the disease was, based on, let's say, the kind of industry they're in. We know that, for example, the meatpacking industry was hit hard by it. For some reason, it spread very quickly in that industry. But perhaps a business owner could have looked at their industry, looked at the age of their workforce, maybe instituted even better protocols within their workplace to minimize the impact while keeping their businesses open. Do you see that as a possible better route? You were looking at a better way to deal with this in the beginning. Would that have been an option?
Well, I think that yes, there are certainly CDC guidelines that are in place that people have. It just complying with it doesn't mean that you have to do exactly the same thing in every single business. Everybody can comply with these safety measures differently. So I think that giving them the ability to do so is very important.
Last week, Attorney General Daniel Cameron filed a motion to block Governor Beshear's executive orders, and he called it unchecked totalitarian use of emergency authority that violates the inherent and inalienable rights of the people. And he had a longer statement than that, but that's the gist of what he said. But then Governor Beshear responded in a tweet. He said this: with no rules, there is no chance of getting kids back to school. We will lose over $10 billion in our economy, and many Kentuckians will die. I hope everyone understands how scary and reckless this is. I want to key in on that number of $10 billion in our economy. Do you know what the governor is referring to when he talks about losing $10 billion in our economy?
I'm not sure where he got that number. No, clearly the economy has taken a brutal hit right now. But amazingly, the underlying economy is still strong. I think everybody's been somewhat surprised and pleasantly so about the revenue numbers that have come in so far. So I think it shows that the underlying economy is very strong and will bounce back when given the opportunity.
Very good. Not all states have shut down their economies. There are 4 states that I'm aware of that allowed their economies to remain open and to allow business owners to determine for themselves whether they should stay open and what's best for their employees. So let's compare Kentucky to these other states. Arkansas allowed its economy to remain open. They ended up suffering 11 deaths per 100,000 due to COVID-19. South Dakota left their economy open. They suffered 11 deaths per 100,000. And North Dakota, again, left their economy open. They suffered 12 deaths per 100,000. Kentucky shut its economy down, and we suffered 15 deaths per 100,000. These numbers are as of July the 15th. Nebraska stayed open, and they suffered the same number of deaths that we did, 15 deaths per 100,000. Now, we get daily reports on the number of confirmed cases, 4 o'clock every day. We hear the report from the governor about how many new cases we have. Should we be looking at the deaths per 100,000 instead of just the new cases? Speaker Osborne, want to take
I
that?
think they're obviously both important numbers to know. I think clearly the fatality rate and the number of deaths is certainly the most devastating numbers. But I think it's important to know both of those numbers, as well as the number of hospitalizations, as well as the number of ICU beds that are both being occupied and available, to make sure that we're not overtaxing the medical system. You know, that was the point from day one, was to flatten the curve, and the purpose of flattening the curve was to not overwhelm the healthcare system like we saw in some other locations. And I think that amazingly, everybody was pretty understanding of that. And then when we did flatten the curve, I think it was a desire for people, or for government, to allow business to get back to business as quickly as possible.
Very good. We have a question from the Facebook page. How does the legislature intend to address Beshear's action? And I'm guessing they mean his unilateral executive orders. Either one of you feel free to respond to that. Does the legislature plan to respond to his executive authority?
I'll let David chime in on that as well. But you know, we looked at, of course, when the virus first hit, we were nearing the end of session, so we knew we had a relatively limited amount of time to deal with that. We had our attorneys look at it. Everybody thought they had a pretty good grasp of what 39A meant, the emergency powers section of statute. It didn't contemplate, quite frankly, Richard, it didn't contemplate an abuse of that power. And I think that everybody was a little bit flabbergasted last week in Boone County Circuit Court when the governor's legal team argued that his powers under the Emergency Powers Act were unlimited. And I think that everybody clearly believes that that is not an appropriate use of emergency powers. And I think that we also need to differentiate between the way that these executive orders are being looked at. Just because something is a good policy doesn't mean that it's legal, or that the governor has the authority to do it. I think that there are some perfectly good policies that have been put in place. And we were very proactive on that to begin with, when we were still in session. We recognized that the governor didn't have the authority, or we didn't believe he had the authority to do certain things, and we worked very quickly to pass things that would give him authorities or authorize certain things, especially for unemployment, for NTI days for school, for teachers, or for schools, and then certain provisions for teachers to allow them to draw unemployment. There were a number of things that we did very quickly. Certainly, we've now seen that, at least in our belief, that the 39A is being used inappropriately, and there is absolutely an ongoing effort to look at reforming that law. There have been a couple of bills filed. Savannah Maddox has filed a bill. Jim Gooch has filed a bill. I think that James Allen Tipton is working on a bill, as is I think Jason Nemus, Jerry Miller. There are several people that are working on different bills. Steve Shelton down in Bowling Green's working on a bill. And while they are all somewhat similar, they all have differences. So what we're going to do, Richard, is we're going to form an informal working group of all those people that have been working on this to just talk through what is good long-term policy. I think that everybody acknowledges that we can do short-term things to fix it for this particular situation. But as we have done everything since we've been, or tried to do everything since we've been in the majority, we try to make good long-term policy. And I think that deserves a very thoughtful conversation, and one that we will have differing views on, all of which will hopefully accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, very good. Speaker Pro-Tem Meade, we've kept you out of this conversation here a little bit. What are people saying in your district as far as, has the governor overreached? Are they asking you to push back against that, maybe curb some of those executive authority that he has?
I think the majority of folks in my community, that's what they're asking for. That's where they are. And when we were in session, as the speaker said, and we were looking at 39A, when you read that, there's one clause in there that says that his powers are limited to other laws that are enacted. So we took it as that meant that he did not have absolute power. And of course, you would think that the three branches of government with the separation of powers, that the governor could not change, suspend, or create any new laws. That is the approach that we took to it when we were in session. And as we saw just the other day, his legal team in court argued that he has absolute authority throughout this emergency enactment. And so I think what you're going to see is that we're going to go in and hopefully do a pretty much some type of blanket reform on 39A that would encompass all three branches of government when we're in these emergency times like this.
Okay, very good. We have another question from Facebook Live. Any thoughts on how the state Supreme Court may rule? Is there even a precedent for a case like this, since the emergency length is unprecedented? So I guess there's two different questions there. Any idea, though? Of course, the state Supreme Court blocked some of those lower court rulings that struck down Governor Beshear's executive orders, and the court is going to rule. Is there any idea, any indication of how the court may rule on the governor's executive orders? Speaker Pro-Tem Meade?
I don't think that we have any idea right now. Of course, the Supreme Court has surprised us in some rulings the past 2 or 3 years. And so I think we're just prepared for anything to come out of that, but we have no inclination of which way they will go on those rulings right now.
Very good. Speaker Osborne, I know this is speculation, but maybe you have a crystal ball in your office somewhere and can give us an idea of what the court might do. Any idea?
I think my crystal ball is in quarantine, so it's not operational right now. But I've talked to several attorneys, and the attorneys on our staff, as well as some other attorneys that deal with constitutional law, and there really is divergent opinion on it. So I would be hesitant to speculate as to what they might do.
Sure. I'd like us to talk a little bit about civil liberties. Now, this is a time that none of us in our lifetimes have ever experienced. The term unprecedented is used a lot, but it's really not true, because there are times in our country when there have been pandemics. I think of the 1918 Spanish flu. It was deadly, much more deadly than COVID-19. But how do civil liberties play in during a time of pandemic? We just saw in the news yesterday, I believe it was, where a Hardin County couple were forced to put on ankle bracelets so the state could monitor them. They were told to shelter at home for 14 days. And from what I'm seeing, there's an outcry across the state. People are saying, you can't do this. This is an infringement on their rights. And of course, the counter argument, and I'll just complete that, the other side is saying, well, it's in order to preserve public health. We don't want them to spread it, go to Walmart or go to the grocery store or go to a nursing home or wherever and spread it. Have either of you thought through how to balance civil liberties during a time of pandemic? Either one of you?
I think it's a tough balance, but I say that it's only a tough balance in how we approach it. I think that rights are rights. They're not rights during certain times. They're rights, and they're rights that are given to the citizens of this country. And there have been wars fought to defend those rights, and I think that those rights are very, very important. I also think that public health is important, and I think that it is completely appropriate to ask people to be cautious, to ask people to adhere to certain protocols. I think that those are absolutely reasonable things to expect of people to utilize their freedoms appropriately. But at the same time, it's a little bit different when you start putting ankle monitors on people. I think that does cross the line.
Yeah. Speaker Pro-Tem Meade, would you like to weigh in on that, the ankle monitor decision by the authority?
I agree with the speaker. I mean, rights are rights regardless of what type of time that we're in. And the ankle monitors was definitely crossing the line yesterday. And this is simply my opinion. I know opinions differ, but yesterday with the governor's new restrictions of lowering the number from 50 to 10 back on public gatherings, we've already seen that some of the courts have ruled that he doesn't have that power to do that on public venues. And so yesterday he mentioned family gatherings and backyard barbecues, those type things. So really what he was doing yesterday is putting more restrictions on your private properties. And in my opinion, I think he crossed the line there as well. But as we make these decisions, as we talked about earlier, looking at the data, we have to look at all the data when making these decisions. And I don't think that's being done right now. I mean, we need to ask how many tests are being done per day. Is that percentage of positives higher than it was previously? When you look at those things, are we comparing ourselves, when we compare ourselves to other states, are they recording their data in the same way that we are? And I think that what you're going to see is some of those answers are no, we're not comparing in the same way. And you haven't heard how many tests we're doing per day, because from my understanding, it's a tremendous number of tests that are being done per day. And when you look at those numbers, I don't think they're going to turn out the same way that the governor's portraying them to be.
Very good. I've had a number of pastors across the state ask me if the governor's recent order reducing the capacity in larger gatherings be reduced from 50 to 10, does that apply to churches? Can either of you speak to that? Does that order, do you think, does that apply to churches?
You know, we've asked for clarification on that too, Richard. It is somewhat vague at this point. There is a specific protocol that he has put forth for churches. So I'm suspecting that protocol remains in place and is not impacted, but we haven't gotten verification on that yet.
Very good. We have several questions on Facebook Live regarding Savannah Maddox's BR 130. That's her pre-filed bill to restrict any governor's executive authority during a time of emergency. And they're asking, there's actually 20 to 25 questions asking about if this will be a priority during the upcoming legislative session, a priority to seek to limit executive power.
Well, as I said earlier, we've got several people that have either filed or are working on bills, and they all seek to do pretty much the same thing, and that is to put checks and balances in place for the utilization of emergency powers and executive orders. What that bill will ultimately look like is yet to be seen. As I said, we're putting together we're going to put together a working group to try to bring some consensus amongst those bills. I don't know which one it will look most like before it's over with, but hopefully, as I said, it'll be good long-term policy. And yes, it will absolutely be a priority as we go into the session.
We are running out of time. I do want to get this question in about unemployment claims. There are still 73,979 outstanding unemployment claims. 6,500 of those, just over 6,500 of those, are from March. Is there anything the legislature is doing to expedite some of these unemployment claims? A lot of Kentuckians still suffering, can't pay bills, can't pay their rent or mortgage. Is there anything? I do know the governor has hired an outside firm to expedite those, but is anything that the legislature is doing to help with that?
You know, this has been an absolute failure of enormous proportions, and I think it's unconscionable that it was allowed to go this long. From over 2 months ago, both the president of the Senate and I made available over 100 LRC employees to try to help break the logjam. And we were refused. These are people that are already state employees. They're used to working with constituents, trying to work out problems. No, they're not trained unemployment insurance investigators, of course not. But in many cases, these people were going weeks and months without ever even getting a return phone call, unless they were calling our office. There was at one point we were dealing with over 100 a day, and in many cases, those were the people that were working for the Legislative Research Commission were the only people that was communicating with those, knowing, of course, they couldn't have direct access into the system, but at least they were able to provide some understanding and some sense of what was going on. And yeah, the thing that's been so unfortunate about this whole unemployment insurance thing is we all know that most people do everything they can their entire lives to never depend on government. They make sure that they take care of themselves. They give themselves every opportunity to succeed and prosper. And in many cases, this was the first time many of these people had ever needed government, and unfortunately, government failed them.
Yeah. The unemployment checks from the federal government are set to end this Saturday, July the 25th. I'm wondering if we should, I'm wondering, should we prepare for a blow to our economy? The economy has been bolstered. Those who did receive unemployment, those checks are going to run out. Do you expect any kind of bump or dip in the economy? Are you foreseeing anything negative happen here in Kentucky because of that, those checks ending?
I don't know that it's specifically because of the checks ending. Certainly, that will be a hit to many people and their resources that they have available. Those that haven't been able to get back to work yet. But I think it's impossible to predict the hit to the overall economy at this point. We just, as I said, we've been somewhat surprised by the resiliency of the economy so far. We know that the underlying economy is strong, but what this is going to look like long term, we just don't have any ability to model it. We have economic modeling for just about everything and every circumstance. But the one thing that we don't have modeling for is a forced government shutdown of business. We just don't know how. Not only the financial side of that, but we don't know the behavioral side of how people are going to react when they actually get the opportunity to reopen the businesses.
Very good. If this is the last question, if the governor does push to close down certain businesses, many of them, of course, have been reopened, is there anything that you can do to push against that? Is there anything either the legislature or what can be done if that does happen? Speaker Pro-Tem Meade, would you like to respond to that?
Unfortunately, with us out of session, we really have no authority when it comes to something like that, other than to continue what we're doing in calling the governor out in the press and releasing those press releases and using social media to get our message out. That's basically all that we can do right now, is to try to continue to put pressure on him to do the right thing, which has been very frustrating because, as we've seen through this entire process, the governor is willing to do the right thing when he's pressured, but he has to be pressured to do that. And us having to pressure him often is very frustrating.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, we are out of time. I appreciate both of you joining us for this program. Any last words from either one of you?
Richard, I appreciate the forum, appreciate the opportunity to be with you for a little while today. As David said, this has been an extremely frustrating process for everybody. Certainly our frustrations pale in comparison to the frustration that citizens and business owners and workers across the Commonwealth have felt. But we will continue to try to be a voice of reason. We will continue to try to push the administration in the right direction. Help them to understand that process is important. And, again, regardless of whether we like policies or not, the process is important to follow. And I think it's important that we continue to point that out. I'd also think that it's important that we continue to empower people of Kentucky to do the right thing. And I think that oftentimes, most times, people will do the right thing. They will make the right decisions when given the opportunity. And we just need to keep that in mind as we continue to constrain their rights and privileges.
All right, very good. Speaker Pro-Tem Meade, any last words?
Well, just thank you again, Rich, for having us on this morning. And I agree 100% with the speaker. He said it all right there. But I think that as we move forward, I believe and I have faith in the people of Kentucky, and we're very resilient here in this state. And I think that once everything gets moving again, we will bounce back very quickly, and we will recover very quickly just because of that resiliency of the people of this state. So I'm looking forward to getting back to what is normal times. And I think that that will be coming soon, hopefully, and we'll see as we go forward. If not, by the time we get into session in January, maybe we can be some help to that as well.
All right. Speaker Pro Tem David Meade, thank you. And Speaker of the Kentucky House, David Osborne, thank you both so much. Appreciate your leadership. May God bless you and have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Richard.